All right, my name is Jack Donovan, and you are listening to PH2T3R, Pater, the Journal of Solar Culture. And I'm stepping in tonight. Maybe we'll be joined by Druvor later. He had some family business to attend to. I like saying family business. Doesn't it make you think that maybe he's doing something dirty, like something mafia, like he had some family business to take care actually, Druvor's the most wholesome. One of the, maybe not the most wholesome, but he's one of the most wholesome of all of us, and I'm sure that's not the case. But anyway, so I'm here tonight with CB Robertson and Ed Haman, Noustor, Taurmenos, and my FiA Fratre e Agni name is Agnitor. And tonight we're going to discuss a good death. And someone suggested it online, and then I had mentioned it to others, and Mr. Robertson was already working on an essay about it. We're just going to touch briefly on that. Why don't you talk about your essay a little bit? I actually did read it today, and I was thankful because, sometimes, if Mr. Robertson writes an essay, it can be a little thick sometimes and long. And I was like, oh, well, this is a totally reasonable length and totally reasonable essay. I'm like, oh, good. I'm like, there's not words, like philosophical words I don't understand in this. I'm like, great. So
it's like
it got right to the point.
Yeah. Well, I had a debate with a transhumanist, actually the president of the American Transhumanist Party, a month ago. He was a really cool guy. We obviously disagreed on some stuff, but he had this ideal, as many transhumanists do, of immortality, of living forever.
Right.
And it's a view that many people seem to hold tacitly or unthinkingly. They don't think about death and the importance of death in our life. It's kind of an important moment. And you can get very mystical, especially around like Jungian crowd, about like, oh, death is the last initiation and other weird things that it's hard to understand what they mean by that. But it is, if you look at your life, first of all, if you assume that you are going to die at some point, that the transhumanist ideal is not true, certainly isn't true yet. No one has achieved immortality. Brian Johnson.
I hear Hitler's still alive in Argentina.
Yeah, he's the yes. But if you assume that the rest of us aren't immortal, we are not Greenland sharks or bristlecone pines that just go on living indefinitely. And if you make the assumption that our life is not merely the continuity of sensation, but has something to do, if the substance of our life, I'll avoid using ontology, if our being has something to do with the relationships we have with others and the story that we share together about who we are and so forth, which is what creates our own concept of a singular self, even in our own experience, then how we die is a very significant event. It's a very significant thing because our lives have a trajectory to them. There are certain things we've all done in our past that we're not super proud of, and we can look back on these things that we used to do in the past and be like, I learned from that. I'm not the same person I was back then. I've changed. I'm not the same person. There is a sense on the other end of that spectrum that the last thing you do is in some sense the most real expression of who you are. It's not absolute, but it's a sense that other people will have about you, and that in that moment you might even have about yourself. There are stories of people saying that their entire life flashes before their eyes, and it's like that life all led up to this moment. And there's there's that famous line from No Country for Old Men where Anton Chigurh's character says, if the rules you follow led you to this, then of what use was the rule? Well, for some people, this is not something to look back on with regret, or at least it doesn't have to be. Sometimes this can be, you know, a peaceful death in old age surrounded by family, or it can be going out in a exploding helicopter, or it could be, you know, dying while doing something you love. I had a family member who was out pheasant hunting once, and he was walking. He saw another person, and he got closer, and he realized this person was leaning on a fence and was completely blue. And he was like, "Oh shit!" And he goes back to the ranch that was nearby. And he's like, "There's a dead body out in your field." And the people at the ranch said, "Oh, that's Fred. Yeah, he always wanted to go out pheasant hunting." Apparently, like some old guy who just like in his old age, he just loved pheasant hunting, and that's what he wanted to go out doing. And is that something that we need to answer Anton Chigurh's question over? He might say, "No, my rule was great. It led me to this moment, and this is now something that Fred will be associated with, for, you know, pheasant hunting or whatever." There's a social and in some sense a personal significance to death that I think the hiddenness of death that we have in our culture. We have all kinds of facsimiles in like video games and movies and so forth. But the reality of death is something that happens in hospitals and in care homes, isolated from our actual experience. We put, you know, sheets over dead bodies so people don't have to see it. We've created a kind of Siddhartha pleasure palace for ourselves, isolating ourselves from the reality of death. But that won't help us when our time comes. And I think, you know, to bring it back to the current week, you know, the reality of death that we see with people like Charlie Kirk or Irina Zarutska remind us that, you know, death will come for us too one day. And so it's worth following Greg Naj's advice in trying to script our death in some regard. Now, obviously, we can't choose the moment we die, usually. But we can script the sort of person we're going to be and the sorts of things we're likely to be doing when death decides to come knock on our door.
Well, in a samurai perspective, it would have been, you know, like life is preparation for death, kind of like
Yes.
that you're planning. And the one thing that I think men, especially men, obviously in the past who are warriors, but men just generally, I think a concern and a real disgust with other men is there's a concern about going out in a bad way.
Yes.
Like a good death could be many things, but a bad, like, you know, you always see it in movies, like like it's clear that someone's about to be killed or die, and they spend it begging on their knees, crying. And that's like, I think as a man, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
And that is something that, like, and that obviously a samurai would agree with that. And that would be something that really takes some mental preparation. You kind of have to decide how you want to behave in that moment. I mean, there's one thing to try and talk your way out of something, and then there's another thing to, you know, just break down into hysterics.
Yeah.
And that's I think, because I think you have to make your decision about how you're going to handle that before that happens, because and I think a lot of guys do think about, like, how would it, if that came down, how would I handle that? I mean, I think about it all the time, like, especially when I was maybe more targeted by people in the similar way that happened this week. You know, not to that extent, maybe, but we don't know. You know, I've always been like, if I open up the front door and that's what I see, what do I do? You know, like, how do I handle that? And in my dream, I say, make me a god. But it's I mean, who knows? But yeah, I think you do have to think about that, how you want to handle that situation.
My favorite story about that, and it has to do with this idea of rehearsing your death, which I think it's a very Zen Buddhist thing. It's also a very Stoic thing to do. there's an old samurai story, not of a samurai, funnily enough. It was of a peasant who was just walking down the street, and there was a samurai walking down as well. And the peasant accidentally bumps into the samurai and accidentally insults him in this way. And the samurai gets very upset at this commoner like bumping into him, and he challenges him to a duel on the spot. And he says, we'll be at this location a week from now. Be there. And he walks off. And this peasant just realizes he's received a death sentence, basically, because he's not going to be able to beat a samurai in a duel. So he goes home, tells his family, and then he goes to a local sword instructor of the village, and he says, look, I know that you're not going to teach me how to fight in a week. I want you to teach me how to die. And the swordsman is like, okay. And he instructs him. It's like, when you go to the location of the duel, show up early, and you're going to put on a blindfold, and you're going to draw your sword, and you're going to hold it over your head. And as soon as you hear the samurai's kiai, as soon as his yell as he strikes, you're going to swing down as hard as you can. And you're just going to stand there with a blindfold on, with your sword over your head, and you're going to wait. And the peasant said, okay. And at the appointed time, he shows up a little early and does just that. And the samurai arrives, and he sees this peasant there, and he's so impressed that he just leaves. Now, obviously, that story could have gone differently if the samurai came over and just killed him. But it's such a beautiful story in its own way. The being able to accept inescapable fate with dignity. We have talked about dignity in the philosophical context of like, oh, this intrinsic value that people always have. But having dignity colloquially is almost the opposite of that. It's something you possess that other people might choose not to possess. To have dignity, to behave with dignity, or to not behave with dignity, and to die with dignity, was often talked about in terms of what care providers can give to the dying. But I think if dignity is something that is possessed and expressed by the person or not, it has a lot more to do with how they behave in the face of imminent death and perhaps great suffering.
Right.
And the martial context is particularly interesting because you can look at it in a functional manner as like, well, if one of our guys is captured, say we're soldiers, and he's captured and they're going to execute him, and he's crying and begging for his life, his connection with us makes all of us look bad. Right. But it's also, I mean, you don't have to think about it in a martial sense either. There's like a million country songs about this experience where someone is dying, and the dying person is comforting the living, saying like, I'm okay, it's gonna be all right, because it can be very traumatizing and scary for the living when someone they've come to care for is on their way out. So it can be a final act. It's your final act to do something in the world. Is it going to be good? What is it you're going to say? What's your final, this is your last chance to have an effect on people. And that moment matters. Not just for other people, but for you in just that one moment. And I think there's a utilitarian temptation to think only in terms of the future. Well, like, what will the outcome of this be? And you say, well, if we're all going to die, then nothing matters, right? Then like, if we're going to die, drink today for tomorrow we die. But that's exactly the sort of person who will watch a movie like Whiplash and totally not get it, and not get the value of perfection in a moment. That is only for a moment. And they'll miss the idea of an Aristeia in like an epic poem like the Iliad, or something as well. You have to look to the value of the moment, and if you can accept that, then death is a pretty important moment to prepare for.
Yeah.
And if you, what is the difference? You know, a good death for the person dying, and when you have a connection to a group or to a family that has been maintained, you know, your good death for them.
Yes.
Like, how much conflict is there with that?
Well, a lot. And that you made me want to, it reminds me before I lose it, there's a story, and my grandfather said it, and so many men say it, and I say it too. I think it's a general fantasy, and this came from somebody online was saying like, oh, well, it was Martyr Maid actually, was saying like, oh, if I had to turn in my son for something like that, I wouldn't turn my son over to impersonal authorities. If he did something that bad, I would just take him for camping and take care of him myself. And that is the most, and someone like called him out as this being the most ridiculous macho fantasy anyone could ever have. No, you would not. Like that is, it's like I would fight if I can see red. It's like just a ridiculous fantasy. You would absolutely not do that.
If I saw a deranged black man with a knife on a train, I would jump in and do something.
Right. 0 people would do that. I mean, and if the people they're just as deranged as the other people, they're the people who are like have some issues. But and we need those people in the world. But they're the people who are like only not. Yeah, they're only not in prison, but for the grace of God, you know.
You go to ICP concerts. You've done some things.
Yeah, but no, you know, like, so there's that idea of like, oh, I would take this guy in the wood. But I think most men have a fantasy, which is very much in the masculine nature, that when I get old and I can't do things anymore, I don't want to be a burden to other people, and I would just rather die.
Yeah.
I would rather kill myself than live as like a decrepit, like whatever guy, because men are obviously very much about I'm strong and I'm capable and all these things that I've talked about for years, and they want to be those things, and when they can no longer be those things and have to be dependent, it's very disgusting to them. Like men are afraid of that, and that's why they hate the idea of old age. It's probably one of the reasons why they die earlier than women. But the idea of being dependent is really gross to men. And so I remember my mom said that my grandfather used to say, well, someday, you know, I'm just going to take a walk in the woods and not come back. And that there are so many men who say that, but no one ever does. Like the amount of men who actually do that is incredibly small. Like if I had a terminal illness, I would go do X, Y, and Z, and no one ever does. Or
so if you're older than
very small
60,
percentage.
If you're older than 60 and you're listening to this, that is Jack telling you to go do that.
Well, I mean, I'd be impressed. But
that's that contrast. That's that contrast, because they say they're going to do that, but then they're attached to the people that will still be alive.
Exactly. And so they don't do it for the people around them, because what does that really look like? Grandpa went out in the woods and shot himself. What does that really look like?
Yeah.
That means someone goes and finds Grandpa's body, and then Grandma's crying and everybody else is crying, and like, you know, like there are certain men who prepare their families for things like that, but they're few and far between. You know, like I think there's some very like stern military-minded men, like who could basically prepare their partner that this is how it's going to go down someday, you know. But I don't think most men are really prepared for that, and they're not prepared to deal with the fallout of it. Even like I think, you know, like, obviously it's a controversial subject, obviously suicide generally, but you know, I've always been on the page of I don't think it's bad or wrong. I think you should be able to call your shot. Like, okay, life is no longer for me. I don't think it's one of those things you don't want to say around young people too often, because they overblow their whole experience, and everything small is very big to them.
So it can be
But at
added
the
to
same
that
time, I think if you've gotten to
category.
like, huh?
This can be added to that list of categories of things that should not be told to people under the age of 20. Suicide is
exactly.
sometimes okay. Free will is not what you think it is, and maybe it doesn't exist. There, like a few other things.
Exactly. Like, I mean, you don't want young people to think this, and people talk about it with service members and all this kind of stuff. Like, they get stuff blown out of proportion and things, but I do think you're right. I mean, if you don't have any other rights, I think the right to like end it is kind of a right. I mean that's not that we're getting into natural rights because that's a whole nother reel from you. But like, it's if we get into, like, it's you. You are the only thing that you own, and if you can't call it, like, what is that? And so I believe that men should be able to do that, and that there isn't a lot of, I don't think it's a shameful thing really, but the reality is that you do look at what the aftermath of that looks like. If you have anyone in your life, if you don't, maybe that's a reason. But
but for most
you
suicide
have
cases, it's absolutely devastating to everybody around them, and it's something.
Exactly.
It's one of the things that gets suicide labeled by many people as selfish, because in most cases it is. Not all every.
Well,
case,
I mean, if you have kids,
oh god,
if you have kids, I mean that's a whole different thing. Like, there was actually a scene where the main guy fantasized that out in what's that show that everybody loves? The one on, why can I never remember things like that? The tropical resort show that just came on. Were you watching it, Taurmenos? It had 3 seasons. One of them was in
show.
Yeah, it's like an HBO thing. It's very critically acclaimed. I watched the whole thing, but anyway, maybe it'll come to me in a minute. But there was a scene in that where the family, they're on a vacation. The whole thing is they're always on vacation in this show at some resort, and the father, they're all fairly well off, like people from North Carolina or whatever, and the father is in the process of being indicted, and his family doesn't know. Like, he's like, for some bad business things that he shouldn't have done, that he was involved in, that he's probably going to jail, or there's going to be a scandal or whatever, and this is this well-to-do family, and so he's going through all this, and they're just having their own resort drama, like, unbeknownst to him, and he's like walking through the steps of, like, he has a gun, he's like like thinking about killing himself, because, like, what's going to have to happen when he come back. His family, they're talking about, like, I just couldn't live like a poor person, like something like that, and he's just like listening to them say that, and they actually dramatized the whole thing. They did a whole scene of, like, him imagining them finding his body and, like, being hysterical and and that's what kind of stops him from doing it. And that's I think the reality of what most of the men deal with when they think about that. Because maybe they are done personally. Like, they're like, I'm good, I'm going to punch the ticket. But I think, but then they end up staying alive for other people, and then they have the bad death that they didn't want. Like I always say, like, my grandfather had probably had a bad death, and he had the opportunity. The gods gave him a great death, and they brought him back. Like, my grandfather on my maternal side literally had a heart attack while marching in a Veterans Day parade. like that was the death he would have wanted. Like, that's how he would have. He went all the way to the Eagle's Nest in Germany. He fought for America, whatever. He I remember we got the call, and he had dropped in the middle of a parade, Veterans Day parade, like in uniform, the whole deal. And but they brought him back, and they saved him, and then he spent the next like 20 years declining in nursing homes. And that's one of the sad things about, you know, society. That's the difference between like good death and like what actually happens to a lot of people, you know.
And you can think about that. I mean, I suppose maybe a more philosophically minded person might think about death more often. You know, our American culture anyway, you know, we already mentioned, sort of hides death. You know, there's definitely cultures that celebrate it a little more, but you can think about death. I mean, I think about my own death a lot, not in any sort of macabre way, but it can, you know, it's going to happen. So it can be a type of North Star where idealism, aspiration comes into play, because it's like, okay, I want to have a good death. What does that mean to me? I want to have done certain things. I want to have become who I'm supposed to be by the time that I get there. And so it's like, I think about death a lot, but it's not like, oh my God, I'm going to die. You know, it's sort of, you know, it's a little bit memento mori, you know, or like Mishima, really. It's a lot more like that. I want to be in that rocket. In that,
you want to make poetry with a splash of blood?
You know, and I want to achieve, you know, there's aspirations and an ideal that I want to get to as close as possible to before I die, and for myself, so that, you know, I can be, you know, I don't know how I'm going to die or when, or if I'm going to have to make that choice, but it, you know, it's for my own good death, but it's also because of, you know, not for fame imperishable, but for that people that know me to remember, to have, you know, a good memory, you know, for people to say, wow, you know, he squatted 400 pounds and he died.
I mean, ideally, while you're squatting 400 pounds,
yes,
be
exactly.
like, you know, like that.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good death.
The best
that thing I shared the other day. The thing with the
make it all the way up and then you have your heart attack. You don't want to fail the rep, you know.
That's fair. Yeah, I mean, it's still glorious. I mean, it's still like an attempt, but you know, like it's still glorious. But yeah, it would be better if you just pass out at the top and get, you know, put down. But it's like that. I think I shared it to somebody the other day. I think I shared it on Instagram. Someone said, you know, like if I ever die at the gym, just put an extra plate on each side, and take the trash out that I'm playing, and my speakers off. Turn that off, so the medics find the man who I pretend to be. And
good one.
It's such a great little line to make me laugh. But what it comes down to, I mean, I think what you're getting at, Taurmenos, is that, and what I would say is that, going back to the things I've said about your life being a story, you know, your life, you know, this is all about narrative. And so what a good death means to you has a lot to do with that story. Yeah. Like, what do you want your story to be has a good match to how you want your end to be. You know, it depends on what you think your dharma is.
So some circles like say I'm trying to live intentionally. You know, like,
yes.
Yeah.
I like that. I just can see it. I can see it in a sign on a wall. Yeah. But yes, I agree. Yeah. Yes. Live intentionally. I mean, it's really the best sign that they could make. But I mean, I agree with it. The sentiment for sure.
Yeah. CG Homebuster says, like the samurai who lost in battle, who drives the sword into his own heart, so long as it's not an easy out, not just like giving up. And then Conan says, I hope to die on 2 wheels before I get old. My plan is to increase my levels of reckless riding as time goes on, until some turn eventually gets me. Not a fan of the withering away approach. Well, that's one way of that's one pretty sure path of doing it. Although it's not guaranteed. When I was in my teenage years, my martial arts instructor's instructor, who's a 9th degree black belt, got into a motorcycle accident in his 90s, and he had to have like some kind of leg surgery, but he wound up being okay. So gotta really ramp up that recklessness there. I'm kidding, of course. There are a variety. It's not the worst way to go, but there are probably better ways to go. The danger with motorcycles is that might just wind you up in a care home for 10 years.
Yeah.
You know,
For
depending
sure.
on what happens.
For sure. That's what I always say, that there are two people who there are two kinds of people. There are people who ride motorcycles and people who don't limp. Because they all end up with fucking canes eventually, or something like that. But yes, White Lotus.
Yeah, it is funny that I guess all three of us have death fantasies. I can sort of you've got your doorbell tranny, and you've got your squat. My fantasy.
That is not my fantasy. That was a rational fear.
Their scenario. I have.
It was a scenario. It was a potential scenario that I felt like there was a possibility of me dealing with, and there still is. Like angry person who's found you on the internet, who makes you into something, whatever they need it to be, and like whatever. But yeah, I mean, there are many. I mean, I've gone through many. I mean, I have many death fantasies, for sure. I mean, like, when I had Volgang, I was like, how do I end this here? How do I? I was like, do I like take something and then hang myself like Odin at the end? I mean, these are actually thoughts that I've had in like worked out scenarios. Of like, what would be the most epic thing for me to do? Like I think a lot of us have a fantasy about. We should retitle this "Death Fantasies." That's a very male topic, but like, what would be the most symbolic thing to do? Like, how can I create the best death if I'm in charge of it? And I think a lot of men have a death fantasy of a terminal diagnosis in which they have X amount of time to make a decision about how to go big. And again, it's one of those things that doesn't actually happen very often. No, not too many people get terminal diagnoses and then do something epic. I mean, it's not like it doesn't happen, but it's rare.
So that's interesting, because my death fantasy has been, everyone has these scenarios in their head of like an asteroid's coming, and maybe it could be more localized. Like everybody in a certain area is going to die in some amount of time, so everyone wants to go visit somewhere or bang someone or like try something that they had never tried before. But everyone's plans in the last 48 hours involve the infrastructure still existing for them to go about like moving from place to place or doing something. And it presupposes that everyone is still going to be like manning their posts at the airport or whatever so they can fly somewhere. But like in a true post-apocalyptic or pre-apocalyptic world, I suppose, if everyone had that thought, like nothing would work. And my fantasy is like being the guy that doesn't leave the post and is still doing that like kind of mundane thing that keeps things moving, even up to the end. And there's like I hadn't for some reason never thought of that in terms of terminal diagnoses before, but it's kind of the same thing. People who have a terminal diagnosis and they say I'm gonna keep going right up till the very end, which is sort of what Christopher Hitchens did, and I'm very grateful to it, because the absolute best line he ever delivered in a debate was the very last sentence of the last debate he ever did. He had the chemo, bald head, and everything. I think he died like a few months later, but it was like going all the way up to the end. And a great recent example, maybe an even better subject of discussion than Charlie Kirk in recent news, tragically easy to forget, is Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy Osbourne had a special chair, a gothic wheelchair, built to hold him upright so that he could sing that last concert, to keep him upright. And he rejected all of his pain meds on the day of that concert because he said, I'd rather be in pain but be able to sing than
cognizance.
not.
That's a big difference
Yes.
too. Like terminal
It's very
diagnosis.
Braveheart, like, you know.
Yeah, if you're gonna lose, if you're like, I've thought about that, and it's like, okay, if you're just gonna be in pain and suffering, but then be able to die with some sort of dignity, that's one thing. But loss of cognizance, like if I think about dementia, and I'm like, that's the thing where I'm gonna have a plan, because I do not want to be wandering around, not recognizing people, fucking walking around outside in underwear and people having to come find me because I got lost. Like that absolutely no way. Like,
but this is also, but this also, I think the example of Ozzy Osbourne highlights maybe a danger of the I'm going to go out on the ice floe fantasy that many men have, because it's like, I'm going to go out in the ice floe in my 60s before it all goes away. I think that fantasy neglects how much you're still capable of into your 70s and 80s and even 90s. Another amazing example of someone who aged like wine was Christopher Lee, who put out his first and I believe only metal album in his 90s. You know, and he managed to come back and do Saruman one more time for The Hobbit. Again, I think he died during the filming of that. But like, there you are capable of doing some pretty incredible things into old age and even well after your like peak performance. It's sort of the hero's fate to die at your peak, to in your Aristeia, your moment of glory, where you are daimoni Isos and you're struck down for your hubris, for challenging the gods themselves. That's like the special operator death. There are guys who go into their 80s, their 90s, even their 100s, just continuing to work, continuing to put out good stuff. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if, I don't know if either of you follow like Thomas Sowell, who is semi-retired, but like he could come back in a moment and like, I put out one last book and it could be like this masterpiece that we didn't anticipate. I'm not saying he will, but it's always a possibility. And there's no sense in closing off that possibility while there's still time, while there's still breath in your chest, and a little bit of anger about how things are going in the world. You know, or not even that.
I know. I mean, it just in the same token, there are many people who have done great works of art and so forth late in their lives just because they're obsessed people and they just keep going.
Yeah.
You know, like architects designing great buildings, they just keep going until they stop, because what else would they do?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, and I think that's there. Maybe this is a different topic, but I you know, like I said, when I went on vacation, I came back thinking like vacation and retirement are two maybe very concepts that aren't belong to a particular era in America that's ending, or a particular era in maybe human history or the West. You know, this idea that everybody goes on vacations, and then the idea that everybody retires.
Well,
you know,
there's no
people didn't do that before. You know?
And there's no stronger correlation with early death for men than retirement.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, but I mean, and I saw it with my dad. Like, yeah, absolutely. Like he you know, he stopped working, and then, you know, men love to be competent at something. Like, oh, I know how to do that. Like I'm an important person. I know things that other people don't know. I can be in charge of things. You spend your whole life being, you know, getting to this position where you're like the big dog and you can tell people what to do and you know what's going on and you can go, you have all the guys that you can call and you know how to make things happen and whatever. And then you retired and you just have my mom yelling at you because you didn't do the dishes right. You know, like that's you're like, oh, you were running a job site and now you're like just a dork who can't do anything right at home. And why would you want that? You know, so you know, my dad went back to work. I think he just finished a job, so he technically is not working right now. But yeah, we went back to work. I mean, he in his like at like 68. Yeah, I think his retirement lasted about 3 years. And you know, because what you get to go feel important again. You know, otherwise what am I doing? What my job is watching TV. You know, I mean, there are people say that they want to travel and do things, but I don't know. That's not even the best time in life to travel.
I mean,
Because then you get to the point where like, oh, well, someone's having a surgery and someone just died and we have a funeral to go to. And you know, that's the whole thing at that age.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's not the best time to travel.
I guess some. I'm thinking of like Italian Americans with big extended families, like maybe, you know, the old people sitting there, you know, in the lawn chair watching 3 generations that came after them, you know, flourishing, having a good time. Maybe there's some, you know, satisfaction in that kind of retirement because they're busy being, you know, the grandparents with, you know, and there's just this huge family and, you know, maybe there's satisfaction in that, but not everybody has that kind of family situation. Most people don't probably.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, well, and that's the big difference too, and that's something that, you know, is different for you and I than it is for Mr. Robertson. You know, like, well, what does this look like? You know, for us, like, you know, like what, there is none of that. You know, like there is none of that there. So like, you know, it looks very different.
Yeah.
You know, like it says, how that process progresses and who's around for it and what matters and like I said, I think me personally, I always have things to do. I don't always have money to do them. That's the struggle. That's what I worry about most about getting old is like, how will I make money? But as far as like having projects to work on, don't worry about me. Like I will have projects to work on for the rest of my life. I maybe at 70, I'll finally go back to art school and learn how to paint again. You know, like, you know, there's many things that I could do. I would love to do sculpture. You know, like endless amounts of creative things that I could do. But, you know, for some people, a lot of people don't have that. And so their job is their sense of purpose. And when you take it away, they don't have it anymore. But, you know, for those of us who are creative, I think that's the endless, like I could keep just doing stuff, you know, and maybe I would get it right. You know, like maybe I get one really good one, like at the end, you know, you never know.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the beautiful things about writing is that if you write something good, you become someone that other people will be having conversations with long after you die as well. So that and I don't think that's just writing either. I think it's art. It's any kind of legacy you leave behind is a tacit statement of how things ought to be, I suppose. And like we talk about this in the trades too. If you do things a certain way, future tradespeople are going to come by. And like I come to job sites sometimes where now I'm in service. It's more like houses and things. It's like, oh, this is what this previous person did. They you know, they ran into this issue. So okay, I see how they did this. Huh, that's interesting. That's not how I would have done it, but it makes sense. Sometimes less so. But you know, if you approach things that way, then regardless of how you die, not to bring everything back to the Republic, but so like Cephalus is at death's doorstep, right? Is at the threshold of old age, which is the very pleasant euphemism for about to die. And dying without debts is like dying without regrets, basically. And it's like, did you do things well? And a lot of dying is not just the moment itself. It's also not it's not leaving this mortal coil without having righted important wrongs and without having left important work undone. And what kind of legacy are you leaving behind, even if it was only one big act? If you put out one big work, was it quality? Was it interesting? Was it original? If it was none of those things, was it at least thought-provoking and authentic to you? That can make that moment of death a little bit more bearable. Because how awful would it be to like have this idea that you've been sitting on for 10 years, and then you get into a car crash, you see your femoral artery got severed, you look down, you've got 30 seconds to live, and you're like, I never did that.
Yeah. And if you'd thought about death enough, you might have. But I mean,
Memento mori.
This is the order of fire. So, like, when it comes to good deaths, there's a lot of examples in the myths that we read, right? Iliad, Gilgamesh. There's a lot of death. Like, what are some examples of, like, yeah, I guess a lot of those are heroic ideal, but maybe not all.
Well, Gilgamesh is an interesting one because that's about the futility of evading death. Right. Homer is interesting because we have two different notions of what a good death looks like.
Exactly.
In the Odyssey, the blind seer Tiresias, like when Odysseus pays his necromancy toll, Tiresias says, a sweet death is what you are looking for. Here's what that looks like, and here's how to find it. And for Odysseus, a sweet death is dying far away from the ocean, which has given him such trouble. But it will be death by the sea. And it will come to him gently and quietly in a way that is peaceful, and he'll be at home near his family, which is sort of what Achilles was contemplating and one of the options he was giving. The good death, the heroic death we see in the Iliad that both Patroclus and Hector suffer, and many others, is dying quite violently on the battlefield. And we talk about like glorious death. It's not glorious in the sense of like romantic and like, oh, one more thing to tell you. It's like the deaths of the Iliad are quite hard to read in places for squeamish people. It's like, and then Polytropon or whoever stabbed a spear through the back of Thread's face, and it came out his nostril, and he screamed, and his eyes went dark, and his armor clattered about him. That's like the poetic phrasing. And then Homer will give like a 2-paragraph little digression about what Fred used to do at home. He was a silversmith who made all these sorts of things, and he just got married before he went to Troy. He didn't even consummate the marriage. Now his wife will never see him again, and his town won't know his silver works again, and he still owes 5 cows to Joe. And like, and it's just that over and over again. It's like, in what sense is this glorious? It's not glorious in the sense of it being pleasant, but it is glorious in the kleos sense, in the sense of it is memorable, and he will be honored for his sacrifice. But it's not glorious in the sense of something you should hope for or wish for. And it's one of the things that, like, I forget the poet who wrote it, but the this notion of glory was mocked in World War One by the poem Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, where it describes guys getting like gassed in the trenches, and one guy doesn't quite get his mask on soon enough, and he basically just drowns. His lungs, or like he's basically vomiting up his lungs from the chlorine gas. And he's like, if you could see, the poet says in this broken, non-metered prose, if you could see what I saw in his, wide eyes, you would not say with such zest, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori, which is like glorious and fitting as it is to die for one's country. It's like, well, that's not what glory meant in these epic poems, because those weren't super pleasant either. It was horrible, but it was also like the endurance of the pain and the facing of danger despite knowing how horrible this could be is the demonstration of courage that is the show of character that makes your death so memorable.
Because it makes it clear they're meeting the hateful dark. I love that description in the Iliad, the hateful dark.
Yeah.
It's and there's a couple of really we haven't read Mahabharata as like any kind of group yet because it takes 250 years, but that the Mahabharata is full of a lot of deaths, like of key characters, very very much like the Iliad. One of them I can just go over like two of them that I think are kind of cool. One of them is Bhishma, who's like, he's the grandsire of both of the extended family, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. He's the grandsire, and he serves as the commander-in-chief during the first 10 days of the war, and he has like this immense skill and invincibility because of a boon that he was given, and he can also choose his own time of death, and so during the war, he's the commander-in-chief for the Kauravas, the bad guys, the unrighteous side of the extended family, and so Arjuna and a character named Shikandi, Shikandi is assisting Arjuna, and they go after him, and Bhishma refuses to fight because he has affection, like he's been holding back anyway, but because he has affection for the other side. But he refuses to fight Shikandi because Shikandi was born female. And there are several versions of the story, but this like sort of nature spirit turns her male. But he knows that she was born female, so he refuses to fight. But anyway, the point is they just absolutely a bazillion arrows. So his body becomes basically a bed of arrows. But he doesn't die because he can choose the time that he dies. So he lays there as a bed of arrows, waiting for the war to end, and then waiting for an auspicious astrological moment as well. And then before he dies, he gives all of this knowledge about Dharma, governance, and life, and then chooses his time to die. And so it's considered a sort of very honorable death because he chose to stay there suffering, filled with all of these arrows, and then give all of his knowledge away to Yudhisthira. The other one is Abhimanyu, and he's Arjuna's son, 16 years old, and the Kauravas formed this thing called a chakra vyuha. It's an impenetrable circular military formation. But he learned in the womb from Arjuna how to penetrate and get into this formation, but not how to get out. And so he's 16, he busts in there, and he absolutely fights and fights and fights, even using a chariot wheel, which has its own symbolism, to fight off. And then he is left unarmed, and the Kauravas gang up on him and really violently kill him, which is very not dharmic, like doesn't follow the rules of war. And it's seen as like this super glorious and heroic death that symbolizes bravery and sacrifice. But it's pretty intense. Those are like my two favorite. There's like a long list of different ways that people die.
Yeah. You know, we're coming up on an hour, so maybe we go. But one example that's not really in my area of expertise, but which came up in our run through of the Ton, I believe, was of a case where was it Cuchulainn? I think it was. Ends up challenged to a duel by his younger son at some point, and he ends up killing his own son in a duel, and it's tragic, but is also this kind of strange demonstration of family martial virtue, and it's tragic because Cuchulainn doesn't realize it's his son at first or something. I'm sure I'm mixing up the details, and I don't remember all the details, but there's a reconciliation after the son is mortally wounded, and where we acknowledge how bravely he fought and this kind of thing. It was a very sad story, which I guess makes it classically Irish, but it's kind of beautiful in its own way on the theme of good ways to go, and I think it might tie the Celtic ideal of a good death, and perhaps the Norse ideal of a good death too, to the Japanese one we were bringing up earlier about it's a great way to die if you die fighting against a really worthy opponent. Like if you're fighting against a really powerful adversary, not a bunch of commoners, but like a truly great warrior, and he takes you out, he gets the best of you. That's a pretty glorious way to go out.
Well, you know, that brings up something about enemies.
Oh, we need to talk about the Red Baron then.
Yeah. Nietzsche, I think he said something about enemies like that, but that he's not the only
sense
one.
In which he loves his enemies. Yes.
Yeah, because like there's Thorstein Veblen talked about this, and I think as well as Nietzsche. But there's an idea that people of a certain class seek out enemies in their own class, and those are their true enemies, not the like people who are beneath them, who they really don't think of at all, but they're like foe enemy, like they have like lifelong struggles with their foe, is a different kind of enemy, and that they honor each other in this long struggle, and that's who you want to be in conflict with, not something. I mean, it brings up the whole criminal thing that we've talked about. I mean, obviously it was part of the discussion this week. Like, that's the sad. One of the reasons why I'm a safe driver is because I'm a pretty safe driver. I mean, I did get a ticket for looking at my fucking phone the other day, but I'm not like a super aggressive driver. And one of the reasons why is because an automobile death is not a good death. It's so common. It is so basic. Like, oh, someone got a car crash and died. It's like their story doesn't even matter. It's like that's not a good story. Like unless they were driving a race car at a racetrack or driving a race car and were playing chicken and it was the end of a cool movie, but like, oh, I made a mistake in high-speed traffic. It's not the best. And I know you had an experience where you saw something like that recently, Mr. Robertson.
That was probably an older gentleman. I think either falling asleep at the wheel, and crossing the median and meeting the wrong end of a semi-truck's trailer axle.
Yeah.
Or he had some kind of medical emergency and was already suffering and then finished himself that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, not there are perhaps more painful ways to go, but because I think his whole death process took like a minute or two, but yeah, not a great way either.
No, no, it's not a great way. And like I said, this as far as a narrative goes, there's no narrative there.
No.
Like it's just boring. It's a boring story. And
The least
that's
you
one of
could
the
do
reasons.
is
Like, yeah,
the least you could do is emulate Diogenes and just when you decide your time is up, just hold your breath. Or so the legend goes.
yeah. Just hold your breath. Yeah, your body really won't let you do that.
Yeah.
It has plans for you that you don't care about. But yeah, no, I mean that's. I think actually I didn't really think about that when we were conceiving of this show, but because narrative is so important, that is one choice that I make. That I was just like, I really just don't want to die in an automobile accident. That's so tiresome. Like it's so boring. No one cares. It's almost like, oh yeah. I mean, people just kind of shrug it off. Like that's, oh yeah, car crash. The end.
So it wasn't quite enough to end Lawrence of Arabia, but it was like it was a definitely a anticlimactic end.
Right. Yeah, like a perfect example of someone like a very anticlimactic end. And you can't always control that. And one thing I did want to push back on a little bit was that quote that you brought up in your essay about like, well, wait until he dies.
From so on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the thing is, it's like obviously a really ignoble death. Like we've talked about, like begging and crying and pissing your pants and like that's bad. That actually does say some things. But there's also something that you said where like as a man you go through whatever different seasons of your life, and you're different people at different times, and this man at some point may have been this guy who accomplished this great thing, and you have bad days. You're like the last day might be a bad day, and that doesn't mean that all your days were bad.
Yeah, I don't think so. Point to Croesus or Croesus, I don't know how to pronounce that Persian name, but it was not like your death is the defining moment of your life in its totality. Right. It was more like you don't know truly if a man is happy, and you don't know the true nature of a man's life until you've seen the full story.
Right.
And until he dies, you haven't seen the full story. So death does still matter, but it's not so much the way he dies so much as the conclusion and the totality of the story, so that we can see, this guy who is a politician who is on top of the world, he looks pretty happy to us, and then you realize, he had to do horrible things with children that he wasn't even interested in order to get there, and in fact all of his wealth is just debt, and he's basically a spiritual slave to his power masters, and like you can see things after someone's death that you couldn't necessarily see prior. And conversely, there are all kinds of stories of people who, in a given moment of their life, are, down in a hole. They are at the rock bottom of addiction and loneliness and poor self-care and low social status and all this, and then manage to climb out of it. I'm reminded of like Gary Vaynerchuk didn't get into business stuff until he was like 34. David Goggins was like a lonely, being divorced pest control tech before he decided, I'm going to join the Navy SEALs and be the hardest, most self-hating, badass dude in Very cool. And now he became he created and became his own meme, which is
Yeah.
extraordinary in its own way. You know, like if you looked at him as a 25-year-old, you'd be very unimpressed. But there's still time, you know, for people to change. Imagine where, imagine where someone like Andrew Tate is going to be in 5 years. I don't even know
Or
what that looks
20.
like. You know,
For 20, yeah, I have no idea. I mean, well, because
in any direction. You can judge him
we-
now. But imagine he gets like really religious. Malcolm X, you know, 2 years before he died and the month he died were very different people. So I think that's the sense in which Solon was talking about that. But I think it also applies. There's a degree to which that applies to the moment of your death as well. At least how the story of your life hits other people.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I mean, obviously, like I said, that's why the car crash thing. I'm like, well, that's not really a good story. Like, so, like, I'd rather have a better hold out for a better story than like, oops, you know. But you know, the opposite of what you said. I mean, the people who are in the gutter and then pull themselves out. We've also been around long enough to watch people who were living perfect lives.
Had it all.
You know, like people who were, had it all, were exemplary, and then just nuked it all. You know, I mean, their lives are, you know, England. They had everything they threw away. But I mean, we know several of those people. We're not going to mention them online because we're not in the really talking shit business. But you know, there's a lot of people who, like, if you would have checked their story 3 years ago, you would have been like, yeah, on top of the world, everything perfect, right? Like the role model of like how you want. They're doing everything right, and then, you know, a few years later, oh, none of that was true. You know, but you also can't use that to. You don't really get weird and nihilistic and cynical about that either.
Yeah.
Because that's what happens to a lot of people. I mean, I think especially my generation, and to a certain extent the boomers as well. But
because the
there's
converse
this
of
idea of
that
like,
is there's so many people who are living quiet, private lives, to
Right.
borrow again from, you know, the latter half of the Republic, who do have enviable lives, but you never know it because they're not advertising it. And there are all kinds of people who advertise their crappy lives and who advertise their great lives and don't advertise their crappy lives. And at every point in that, you know, grid of advertises, doesn't advertise, good, crappy.
Yeah, it becomes a little bit of a cope that like, oh, all these happy people really have miserable lives. Like I think very much. I think a lot of Gen Xers look at like all the Stepford wives and all these people like, oh, these people who are pretending to be perfect are actually all miserable. And I think that very much, I said, like the boomers are very much tied to that mythology as well. And sometimes that is true. You know, sometimes that is true, but also that sometimes it's not. You know, like sometimes they're no worse off than anybody else. You know, like so, but they're just, everything else looks better. You know, so it becomes a comforting kind of cope for people as to not pursue excellence and not to get better and not to do what they really believe that they should do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of that is also because when you're looking at soap operas and stuff, there is you need a plot, and if everybody if someone genuinely has a great life, oftentimes there's no plot.
Well, yeah. There's no struggle and there's no conflict and whatever. They just look boring. Like I said, there's that one guy that is in my area. I'm like, wow, you make being fabulously wealthy look really boring. You know, like, like you're not doing anything. Nothing exciting is happening. You just have nice things. But yeah. So someone said that's the end of the Return of the Jedi, but I don't know what they were talking about.
I think that was in reference to part of the Kukulkan story. Maybe
Oh.
Return of the Jedi borrowed from the Ton, because that happens a lot. There's a lot of big films that borrow from ancient stories. Because my understanding, I could be wrong on this, but my understanding is that the Ton precedes the Star Wars universe. No, not the other way around.
He said dryly, but yes, I'm fairly certain you are correct in that, sir. But it might have been that, or it might be. I mean, there's a lot of fathers who kill their sons, sons who kill their fathers. It's an ongoing theme because it's
goes back
traumatic.
to Charlie Kirk, right?
Yeah, right. That whole discussion. Yeah. So I mean, that's very like that's an ongoing theme. I think I referenced something. There was a story just because I've been researching ancient Rome this year. There's a famous story from the history of ancient Rome where a father turns in his two sons for treason to be executed because he's a loyal Roman citizen. And sorry, but that also fills in with the idea of the pater, whatever paterfamilias or whatever, that the whole Roman belief system in which you were technically allowed to kill all your children if they were like shitty. Anyone who was within your realm of power as the head of the household is basically like, no, this one goes.
True. That's true.
Yeah.
Castle doctrine.
Yeah.
As far as jurisdiction goes.
Yes. It's really cool. The more you look into it, I mean, I'm not saying it's the right way, but like, and the way it was explained, at least, I mean, I think Taurmenos and I both listened to the same lectures on this, but the way that it was explained, they both took the same, I think, great course in the history of Rome, and the way it was explained was basically like, on paper, that was the law. Basically, on paper, anyone in your household, slaves, women, children, anyone who is under your jurisdiction as the head of the household, you could basically, sorry, time's out. And you were like blameless. But in social convention, that there probably would have been issues. There would have been gossip. There would have been like, can you believe what he did? Blah, blah, blah. There would have been a lot of talk. But legally, that was you were allowed to do that. But in practice, it probably wasn't done very often.
Imagine what an anthropologist. I'm sure we're fairly far off subject now, but imagine an anthropologist from like 2150 looking back to the present time and looking at all these laws like, oh, did you know in Northern Ireland it's still legal to hang a Protestant from this bell tower every other Sunday? Did you know it's actually they made it illegal? It was such a problem in Texas that they made it illegal to catch fish with lassos. Like just because something is on like a law on the book doesn't necessarily mean it got there by rational means or was practiced regularly or something.
Well, the practice regularly, I always feel like it got there because there was a problem. Someone was lassoing all the fish, and they're like, "This has to stop." And no one's done it since, and then it just seems silly. But like, there was that one lasso guy.
It could have just that just don't look right. That don't look right.
Yeah.
That's not how you do it.
Yeah, that ain't right. Ain't no part of God in that.
Not in the Bible.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, cool. All right, well, we should probably wrap this up since we're like veering into funland, which is actually kind of the best part. But anyway, make sure we didn't have any. Okay, we don't have any more comments to deal with, so I guess we'll just sign off here. I think it was a good talk. I'll try to put out a newsletter. We got a really good response from the last couple newsletters. I should probably be doing that more often. I'll put a little summary of the show and send that out in a newsletter, and maybe what is your death fantasy or selection of fantasies is actually a really kind of, maybe I'll start that in the First Man tomorrow, or I'll put it as a topic tonight. That'll be topic of the day for tomorrow. Like, what is your death fantasy? I think is a really good. That's the kind of icebreaker
exercise.
I like. Yes, yeah. Well, I have an interesting discussion.
And you have
like,
to,
what's your favorite color?
You have to prohibit bleeding out in the snow to X music, because the meme is a lame response now. That has become a meme online, which is like its own kind of interesting and cool thing. But yeah,
it's a very, like I said, it's a very male fantasy, and that's why I like it. Men respond to it because they're like, oh yeah, this seems good. Bleeding out of the stuff, like it's very again a desire for a beautiful death. Like that is a very aesthetic death, and that's why they like the idea. That's an interesting.
For women,
beautiful
it's
death.
just death by chocolate. I think is the only that's the female death fantasy. It's death by chocolate.
That's interesting. Like, do women have death fantasies? Do they even have souls? But no, I mean, they probably do. But like, I mean, they must. Well, now we're really veering off topic, because if they have rape fantasies, they must have death fantasies. They all have rape fantasies, so it's who knows? We could explore the feminine. We could bring a woman and put her in a cage, and then ask her these questions, and she'll have to respond, and then we can write down the answers.
So only respond if you get
coming next week.
You have to get.
Yeah. That'll be the next. Tune in next week when we talk to a woman in a cage. I think I'm just going to sign off with that. Leave them hanging, and like maybe we'll have a woman in a cage. Maybe we'll have a woman in a cage. Who knows? All right, guys. It's great talking to you as always, and thank you all for watching at home. Join the Order of Fire and the First Man. If you don't, you're a loser. And I should just sell it like that. Just neg everybody. And anyway, beyond that, see you later. Stay solar.
Stay solar.
Stay solar.
Thank you for watching or listening to the Journal of Solar Culture. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and leave us a comment. The first volume of our journal is available in paperback and now, finally, on Kindle. Pick it up in our store or on Amazon.